Thank you everyone for joining our office hours session today. I'm Ashley Kim. I run customer education here at Fullcast, and we have Tyler Simons who does customer success. This is the first of 2 office hour sessions that we're doing on Smart Plan. This is actually one of the biggest pieces of feedback that we got in our customer survey that we did earlier this year. So we really wanted to be sure that we could put together content that would be very timely and would be very actionable on this topic. And so as folks are heading into or already working on planning, we want to make sure that we can help you leverage Smart Plan to let us do all the heavy lifting for carving your territories. So you can see on the screen here, we have 2 sessions planned out. And our session today is kind of more of the basics of territory management and resource alignment. So we'll go ahead and do our agenda slide really quickly. It's a pretty simple agenda here. So we're going to start with a very quick overview of what Smart Plan is, just to do an amount of level setting. I know that people may be at various levels of understanding of exactly what all the components of Smart Plan is. If you're not so well versed, that's completely fine. We'll share a lot of resources after the webinar and the follow-up email, including a slide-by-slide breakdown of all of the different inputs for Smart Plan. And then we'll also dive into 5 specific scenarios. The hope here is that by seeing some examples or templates, you'll start to really get a feel for how these different aspects of Smart Plan can work so that they get you to be able to execute the various use cases for your organization. And then the last box here, the format, we'll have slides and we'll intersperse that with actual live demos in a demo plan. I'm going to be keeping an eye on the Q&A throughout the session, and Tyler will be doing a lot of the demoing. So be sure that if you have questions, feel free to drop them in that Q&A box at any time, and we'll either take them up at the moment if they are immediately something we should talk about, or we'll also reserve time at the end of the session for those. And then, as I already mentioned, we'll be sending the recording, slides, and links to some supporting resources out tomorrow in a follow-up email. Next. Awesome. So this is my very simplified version of what Smart Plan is. I think the important thing for us to understand is this is for building typically rep level territories, and balance is at the core of this. So you can see in the first image here on the left, you're going to basically tell it how many territories you want to build, and then put in a combination of balancing criteria to tell it exactly what metrics need to be equal across all the territories. And then after you do that, you can actually rearrange the priority of those things as you really tweak and refine what the balance looks like. And this is an iterative process, really. You can do a Smart Plan once and then tweak it and continue to refine the different criteria and the way you're prioritizing them to get the outcomes that you need to see. And that's the last slide there. You can see the screenshot that I included for the third step in the process is the beautiful balancer chart where things are mostly balanced, ideally, with your Smart Plan.
Except for not in that report.
I actually realized when I looked at the detail, the first 2, yeah. So, it would look better than that.
It depends on what you're looking at. And this is always a challenge, right, with one of these things. And I think this is a good little take on this, is it's likely that particularly I'm looking at tier A, which is the red bar, because that's probably higher priority. And if we've balanced this world based on making sure our parent-child stay aligned, and the tier A is not just looking at parents, but the whole world. So that means your subsidiaries plus your parents. It's very likely that your balance will be lopsided because there are some corporate families with a ton of subsidiaries with a ton of potential. And as much as we try our best to get everything balanced, it's nearly impossible to do that when you have such huge corporate families that really skew the balance. But it's also probably coming from the demo environment, in which case everyone's constantly moving stuff around outside of the demo.
Right. And I don't know if what I pulled in, the things that I pulled into the chart may not have even been the same things that were used to create that specific territory. So,
Anyway.
Awesome. So this is where I hand it over to you, Tyler.
Oh, great. So territory management, resource alignment. I think for us, what is the point of this? It's one, to design equitable rep level territories so that you can leverage multiple data points There are the ability to optimize territories in industry verticals by dividing concentrated potential. We'll look at that scenario, distribute accounts accordingly or according to seniority. I see a couple people on this call that's kind of probably be an important thing for them, and they're kind of already doing that. Align sales resources of multiple roles in a pod structure. So we'll look at an option around that. Very simple option, but we can make some more complex adjustments there. And then easily manage coverage for reps on leave. That's a common thing that comes up, and we have a kind of the smart plan within a smart plan type of option. And I'll try to hold my joke for that one until later. And that way everyone can get my joke when we get to that point, and it'll be great. All right.
Be sure to
What's
ask
up?
questions. Just a reminder to folks to feel free to ask questions at any time, and I will be keeping an eye on that. And I'm gonna go hide.
And you know what? Before we get into this first scenario, which is designing equitable rep level territories, I think it would be good for us to just spend a little bit of time in getting oriented around all the components of Smart Plan. And this will be a review for most of you, but we will do it anyway. So I'm going to add hierarchy. We're going to go into the Smart Plan world. And of course, we're just going to go one by one all the way down this list and run through all the different configurations, components, what they do, what your expected behavior would be. So from the territories piece here, this is the number of territories you are going to build. If you are overcarving for your fiscal year, so I'm going to hire 2 people and I've got 6 people already in seat, that means I want to build 8 territories. And this is also another scenario where mid-year, maybe you are, we've called it peel and grow, where mid-year you've decided to add an additional headcount on top of, let's say, the 8 that are existing, and you've already built out those territories. Then you could come back in and edit the smart plan and go from 8 to 9, and we would create the territory for you. The max number of accounts per territory, this is this is the top level, always enforced, no matter what you do down below. So we will cut off the balancing at this level. So if you said 50, no matter what happens, we will cut it off at 50 to make sure that you don't go above the 50 number of counts. Now, there are some options here to make sure that we get up to the 50, because the smart plan will cut you off before if it throws balance too much in one way or another. So there's a little bit of nuance there, but just know that setting 50 will cap it at 50. All right, so there is a bunch of criteria which you will add, and we'll explore some of these as we go into the scenarios. Just know that balance by, which are these first 3, are all balanced by evenly. So everything, no matter how many territories you're going to build, we want to balance evenly across those territories. And you can do this by number of accounts. So scenarios where I want to scope down into, let's say, a specific subset of accounts, industry focused, propensity to buy focused, and balance those evenly across the territories. Field value would be something that you're looking at a field and wanting to balance that. I've seen number of employees, so balanced by the sum of number of employees. And then metrics, of course, we've got all these metrics that we've built within the app, and similarly like ARR or bookings potential, if you're already adding that stuff up, you can use those metrics. These two are kind of the same, because a lot of times the metrics that you build are very similar to the field value. The difference being is that metrics can pull from related objects in Salesforce. So if you're bringing in that opportunity level data, you can build a metric on it and then use that to balance those territories. Weighting, we'll talk about those, I think, in a specific, particularly the rep one, but the weighting here, similar options, but then you get to drive how you want the accounts to be allocated to each territory on a percentage basis. So 20% here, 20% here, 50% there, and you can kind of customize that. There is some dynamic weighting based on metrics that are available in this too, but We've seen most customers just kind of set that stuff on a static structure. Grouping by field value, this is very similar to grouping by affinity, and we'll see this come up in the scenario with the pod structure and trying to minimize the amount of overlay, the number of AEs that have to work with a CSM and trying to keep that as small as possible. Minimizing disruption, keeping certain accounts aligned with existing reps. So we typically don't want to disrupt those relationships between reps year over year. And so if there's activities or open opportunities or whatever it is that we're trying to minimize the disruption on, we want to keep that customer relationship intact. And so that's really important. And then maximize, minimize would be similar to this, but you can be more specific, as in to say only put the 10 accounts into the maximum, or only put up to 10 accounts for tier A into every territory. So you can be very specific with the data set, whereas this is more of an overall max. So after we kind of build out all those criteria, we will ask you how to treat any unassigned accounts. So if there's any accounts that we can't balance into or use in the balancing criteria, then we typically dump them in an unassigned node, much like what we see here. But you could also choose to just distribute or round robin them among the territories. This is just very much just like sorting and just going, you get one, you get one, you get one, until we just kind of top everything up. The option here would really get rid of anything in unassigned. So where you would see nothing in unassigned, with one exception, you have a max number, which is your ultimate limit. So we would top up until that 50 and then drop that out. Corporate families, we do consider the corporate families in the balancing, and you can choose to treat everybody on their own. So subsidiaries, parents are all treated separately. You could choose to keep the subsidiaries with the parents. And then you could also choose to keep certain subsidiaries aligned to the parent based on certain criteria that you specify down below. In this case, if we were to have chosen to assign all children to the same segment as the parent, then we would want to figure out how we want to factor in those child accounts. So do we want to factor the subsidiaries in the balancing criteria that we specify up here? If so, then we would include. If we don't want to factor them in and only use the parents as the balancing criteria, then we would select exclude. And this really depends on how much you care about the subsidiaries that follow along and whether those are really important to consider in the overall potential of a territory, or if they're more of just a bonus that you get because you're just mostly focused at the parent level. Named accounts and exceptions. Most everyone knows that we kind of move accounts manually from one place to another, and we've got those little green and red pins that exist next to the accounts when we kind of name them as an account or name them as an exception. So after you build out the territories, if you do any of that stuff manually, you can choose to include those named accounts and exceptions in the balancing criteria, or you can choose to exclude them outside of that. Most customers will leave this as include because that is a part of your overall territory potential, which is important for the overall balancing of everything. And finally, when you first balance out a smart plan or create a smart plan, we will ask you if you want to add any assignments at the time of the creation. And so this would create those assignments for you. And these can be then leveraged also in the minimized disruption that we talked about. All right. That's everything about Smart Plan. Now let's talk about our scenarios. So scenario one, we'll just go ahead and share this full screen. So we're going to talk about designing equitable rep level territories, leveraging multiple data points. This is usually where everyone starts. The most beginning start of how we would leverage Smart Plan at the rep level. And common scenario, if you are still planning at the geography level, so I'm looking at the New York Metro or the Bay Area, and I'm splitting up into 5-digit postal codes, one option to kind of dip your toes into the Smart Plan world would be to just take that larger Bay Area and say, well, I've got 5 reps in the Bay Area. And instead of saying you get this postal code and you get that postal code, I want to just balance that evenly across my 5 reps on a set of metrics or KPIs that I really care about. And this is really a good transition point for a lot of people that are planning at that geo level. All right, so let's do this. We're gonna go ahead and start by minimizing the disruption. We want to balance by the number of tier A accounts. We're gonna then balance by our bookings potential. We're gonna balance by ARR because customers also matter in this go-to-market. Sometimes you'll split customers out from your prospects because of how you go to market for the customers. So you might have like an account manager or a renewal manager that's responsible for customers. In this world, the AEs or the sales reps are still responsible for customers. So we're going to include that in at this point. And then we'll balance by number of customers. By the way, tier A bookings potential are all made up in our demo environment. So if you've got things like TAM or high propensity accounts or tier 1, all of those are kind of proxies for what we see here. And those are all can be used in the same manner. So let's pivot back. And so we've actually got our first scenario here. And this will just kind of help us speed things up. And I'm just going to edit it. So I built 5 territories. I did not put a max number. And I set up the minimize disruption. Minimize disruption will work with the select with either owner ID or any of the names. So if you've got owner name, or if you've got those lookup fields, maybe you've got like a CSM lookup field or an SDR lookup field that you want to align that, then those would work and we can use name or ID. The role pertains to who you're going to assign to the territory. So in the standpoint that I've selected account executive and that person is normal, not temporarily covering the territory, then we will align accounts that they own in Salesforce, which is this owner ID, to their territory that they've been assigned to. So in the case, and we'll just kind of back out of this so we can see that, I have assigned in the coverage tab, Bob here as the AE. We will align any accounts that Bob already owns in the CRM to this all companies 1-1 territory because he exists here on the assignments with the AE. If I assigned or changed the role for Bob to be account manager, then we're not going to align any of those accounts to this territory because we've selected that specific role there under the minimize disruption. Now, one way to go a bit deeper, because this might be everything, right? If you're balancing or minimizing disruption for customers and you're just doing this, then guess what? You're not going to have anything left over to kind of balance out any overcarved or pre-carved territories. And so you might want to scope this down to say, only align accounts that are high propensity or activity in the last 90 days, or open opportunities. So you can add conditions to do this based on data that you've added into the Fullcast environment. And so status is equal to customer could be one. So these are a bunch of different options for us to kind of filter that data set down to be more specific as to what we keep aligned with the existing rep. Next up, we said, let's balance by the number of accounts. And in this case, we've decided to do the type equals customer, but we will switch that over to tier. Actually, did I do that later? I did, and let's pull that up. So I'm going to reprioritize that over the customer because in our office hours deck, we've got this structured here. And so you notice I just dragged and dropped with this 9-dot dial pad looking item here, and you can kind of reprioritize. This is really important because as you get down to the last and final criteria here, this is not going to be as balanced as something that's in the higher levels. Because as we go down, we're prioritizing, or if you think about like building a layered cake, like we're going to take all of those tier A accounts, allocate them out to the territories, And if there are some tier A accounts that are customers, well, we've said we care more about the balance of tier A than we do about the balance of customers. And so we're not going to disrupt this balance of tier A over the balance of customers. Now, if I cared more about that balance of customers, I would flip that to ensure that the customers stay balanced. Then within the scope of a balanced customer set, we can then play with the tier A's a little bit more. We do run multiple scenarios in the background. So when you click go, there's simulations that run for us to figure out what is the best option and then deliver that out. But ultimately, this priority is really important. And if you're kind of not happy with the results when you're looking at the balancer, it's usually just tweaking the priority to get it down to where you need it to be. So in our example, we're going to go ahead and do tier A, and I've just applied that criteria to say scope down the tier A accounts. If I had only 8 or let's say 5 tier A accounts, then we would put 1 in each of these territories. And another thing to note is that if there are accounts that we are aligning up here in minimize disruption that are tier A, that will be considered in this balancing. So if all companies 1-1, which was Bob owns 10 tier A accounts, and there are only 5 left, we're not going to give any more to Bob. And ultimately, Bob's going to have a lopsided territory with tier A accounts because we're not going to disrupt the minimize disruption in order to get this balanced. So if I flip this, then that would obviously change that. So, all right, next up, we said bookings potential, which we've done, and we've used that as a metric. Alternatively, I could use the field value, right? So I could say go balance on the sum of bookings potential, and these two are exactly the same. And there is no preference over one over the other. And so we've just chosen the metric since we had that built. Then the following on that, we had said we're going to build out the ARR and then the number of customers, which we've also used ARR as a metric. And then we've filtered down on the customers. Some other things you could do with these metrics of the bookings potential, you could filter that down on a specific data set again, maybe industries or high propensity to be really specific on what you want to balance across those territories. We will leave as is all these here. We've already discussed those and you can kind of tweak from there. And that's it. That's how we've set this up. I will save this since I changed it. And because I did change it and I had already created the smart plan, it's not going to run the rules on this automatically for me. We will only rerun the rules on the accounts when we first create a smart plan. But if I now want to run that scenario, then I would have to, after saving it, come in and select rerun rules to run the rules on all the accounts. All right. The next thing that we've seen is kind of optimizing territories and industry verticals by dividing concentrated potential. So what you might commonly hear me kind of talk through is the financial service space, where we have a lot of, there's concentrated potential in the New York area. And this could be like tech, could be Bay Area or Austin or Seattle. And so it's really important that you balance those or focus those accounts to be balanced evenly across those territories that you're about to build. And you can do that by using the balance by number of accounts to filter on that data set. So if we go into our industry scenario here, and we could say that this is financial services, we've already carved that bucket out. So we have the world of our financial services accounts. And now we're saying, let's go build me 5 territories. I want to balance on all of the accounts that are located in New York, and I want to balance them evenly across the 5 territories. Now, you could get specific and say city or postal codes. Unfortunately, no map here, but you can at least filter down on the specific address data to make sure that those get spread evenly. Now, if you've got things already flagged like high propensity or tier A, then maybe that's a better way to approach it than just geography. But if you're not quite there and you want to use this at a geography level, this is a great way to do that. I've also thrown in a couple other scenarios that we've seen. So in this case, because it's an industry vertical, we're actually dropping all of the accounts across FinServ into our FinServ vertical. That means everything from 2 employees all the way up to 70,000 employees or more. And a thing that we might want to think about is that, well, the accounts that are at the 50 employee level might not have as much potential as somebody at the 15,000 level. And we're going to split those up evenly across those reps. But I want to make sure that it's not just somebody gets stuck with a bunch of smaller companies. So I've said, go take all of the accounts that have less than 1,000 employees and balance those evenly, and then go take everything that has more than 1,000 employees and balance that evenly across the territories. And so you could do this banding to really get specific on how you spread specific segments of your customer base across the territories. Same settings, nothing interesting there, but here's our industry scenario. And if you've got questions, feel free to drop those in the chat so that Ashley can interrupt me. So it's just not me talking the entire time. But everyone knows that I love to talk. So distribute accounts according to seniority. This is a common one that we're starting to see more and more often. We're seeing a lot of, you'll hear this very often about like leveling or junior senior reps or tenure based. And so these types of territories, what you're actually doing is saying, I have a set of mid-market reps, let's say 30 of them, but they're all in different levels of tenure or seniority. And within mid-market, which is our specific customer band, I want to make sure that I distribute accounts a little bit differently to those senior reps versus the junior reps. And so I want to customize the mix of their book. And so to do that, that's where we come into the weighting. So we have that territory mix, and then we'll edit this. Oh, I'm already editing. Great. So same thing, 5 territories, but now we've got the weighting that we've built out here. And we made this really simple for this call today, and you can get really complex with as many of the weightings that you want to do. But essentially what we're saying is take all these tier A accounts or the highest propensity accounts that we have, and I want you to balance those in a certain way across those 5 territories, giving more of them to our top 3 territories, which will be our more senior reps, and giving a little bit less to the 4 and 5 territory, which is the more less tenured rep. So in this case, one recommendation is after you kind of do this, certainly quota should be different. They shouldn't all have the same quota because you're giving more potential to territories 1, 2, and 3 versus 4 and 5. And those are things that if you're doing quota in Fullcast on the territories, we could calculate that out. But definitely make sure that that's considered when you're doing your territory creation here. And then we flipped it, right? So now I've taken our tier B, so maybe still high potential, but maybe not so much as tier A. And we've said, okay, make sure we focus more of those tier Bs in the 4 and 5 territories and less of them in the 1, 2, and 3 territories. And so now we're kind of mixing that balance up to give a different book mix for those tenured reps versus non-tenured reps. Another way to think about this too, and so this is certainly not the end all be all, because what we've got is these reps all living in the same level, right? For us, the levels are like level 1 is all companies, then we've got level 2, which are all these territories, and then level 3 is this. So as we think about this territory mix 1 through 5, that's our leveling. And instead of having tenured reps and less tenured reps, in the same leveling, we could split this up into two territories, which is bucket one, which is the higher seniority, and bucket two, which is the lower seniority. Do adjust a 1-2 mix between the two. And that's much like we talked about here with this 75-25. We want to split those up. And then from there, when we get into the next level, you then spread the accounts evenly across your tenured reps or your non-tenured reps. Ultimately, it depends on the decisioning between that, really depends on the number of reps you're trying to split up. So if you're trying to do this at the scale of 30 or 40, it's probably better to do that initial split and then go into Smart Plan. If it's more like 5 to 8, then it might be just easier to do it at this level that we walked through today. One challenge today is if you do that earlier split, the minimized disruption only works at the immediate level. So here I have my reps and I have minimized disruption, then we would certainly keep everything aligned. But if I have a 1-2 and then reps underneath that, then this minimized disruption won't work as intended unless you've got other fields to look at, like managers or something like that. Okay, next. So let's align sales resources of multiple roles in a pod structure. Today, we're only going to look at this owner ID structure as if like we were building out CSM territories. But if there are any fields like those lookup fields that we're leveraging, that we're trying to minimize the overlay ratio, then that would be an option for us to use this group by value. So I've certainly left the first one here, which is just a basic balance by number of accounts. But then all I've said is group by this value. And we used to call this clustering. So that might be another way to think about it, is really clustering the owner IDs that are the same together in a territory versus just let's not pay attention to that and spread that evenly. So as you're building out maybe 5 CSM-based territories and you know you've got 25 AEs, then using this group by field value or this clustering would allow us to try and keep each CSM working with about 5 AEs. That might not be perfect because we're going to prioritize stuff above this. And so maybe some CSMs work with 6 or 7, but the ultimate result is getting to a point where you're not having one CSM work with 15 or 20 AEs, which can be a little bit difficult because you're like trying to learn how everybody works together and lots of different calls. And the more that you work together with a specific person, I think you see that tighter alignment that comes through with that. So that's a great example of how to use the group by field value or the clustering. And certainly if we had the SDRs to AEs and you had those lookup fields, you would just use that instead of owner ID, which is what I did here. And you can always set filter criteria on it. All right. So let's easily manage coverage for reps on leave. This is a common one. And what we typically see here is, and I'm going to just go, we will look at it from this standpoint here. So I'm going to start with this all companies 1-1. So Fullcast generally recommends that if Bob was to go on leave or is leaving the company and you're going to terminate Bob or you're going to end date his assignment, then you would kind of run through this workflow. We could apply those temp coverage. We'll say temporary coverage here, and we'll make it this person. And so in this case, when we run through this workflow, we'll see Kyle here as the temporary assignment. But this means that Kyle is running this entire territory. And a lot of times what we're hearing from customers as well, I actually want to take a set of accounts that are in all companies 1-1 and spread them evenly among the other 4 reps until we hire the backfill or until Bob comes back if it is an extended leave scenario. And so in that case, what we recommend doing is just a simple temp coverage smart plan. And I actually have built that out already in this world where we have um, the 5 territories, and we've just sent a simple balance by number of accounts, which we would take across the 5 territories and make sure everyone's got the same number. You can be more specific if you'd like. If you wanted to clone the higher level one when you first create a smart plan, and I'll show that real quick, you could add hierarchy. And then up here in the actions, you can import that segment setting. So in this case, I could say balance scenario, and I would check the box, and that would just clone over all the rules for the smart plan that you're kind of at the upper level. Now, under the temp coverage, coming back to this piece, let's go into edit. I've just balanced that evenly. And when I did the initial setup, I set everybody as a temp coverage. So now if we look at that coverage, what we're seeing here under the initial tab, which we could say this main territory here is the main AE or the main rep. Chrissy here was covering the territory from January 1st to the 20th and is going on leave for about 6 weeks. And we'll come back on November 4th. We've got that future dated, and then this goes until the end of the fiscal. Now, if I go to my temporary coverage territories, and one of them was Bob that I kind of canceled, but I'm still here. So in this case, Chrissy is inherited, showing the coverage until the 20th, but then Bob picks up the temporary coverage from the 20th to the 27th, and then here's Chrissy again. So in the case that Bob takes over, when we on the 20th run that export job, we will push Bob to the account teams instead of Chrissy. There will be a temp flag on there. You can use that to expose within your CRM. And then ultimately, when Chrissy comes back, you can just kind of get rid of these territories and then go back to your main territory. Now, the follow on to this is if you've got holdovers or holdouts implemented and there's open opportunities that get generated by Bob or any of the other temp coverage here, then we certainly would want to apply some sort of holdout policy to those open opportunities. That can be any time frame or the end of the quarter. And then once if those open opportunities remain open at the end of that time frame, then we would transfer those back to Chrissy. So multiple ways to handle that, but this is certainly a common way that we see people wanting to kind of distribute out those accounts, and you can just leverage a smart plan to balance them evenly across the reps and then push those out to the CRM. All right, I think that is about it for us. We've covered the 5 common scenarios that we're seeing. Next week, we'll go in depth on a couple of more scenarios. Ashley, I'll pass it back to you.
Yes, awesome. That was really helpful to go through. So I think we'll pause here for any questions. And while people are perhaps coming up with their questions, I will plug a couple other things. Of course, Tyler just mentioned we have next week's session as well, which will be more advanced, a little bit more complex scenarios. So definitely hope folks come back for that one. There is going to be a survey immediately after we exit out of the webinar. You'll get a link in your browser, I think is how it works, to a survey. Please take a couple minutes to share your feedback on this. We're hoping to continue to roll out sessions and series around topics that are immediately valuable to you all. Obviously, everything's valuable, but really want to focus on things that are of high priority and do these hands-on sessions where you really get to see how things work and have the chance to ask questions. So fill out the survey. The recording and deck and some supporting resources are going to be emailed out tomorrow. And that's the last two bullets there. I'm still looking for questions, but if folks are satisfied, of course, thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you next week. And we'll hang on here for a couple minutes to see if any questions come up.
Yeah, this is your moment. It wasn't supposed to be me just talking the whole time. Everyone's supposed to interrupt me with
People are
questions
having
and how to
lunch.
do this and that. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. I had
So
actually one question about the copying. I think I haven't caught up on this functionality, the copying rules. So if nobody asks questions, when you were copying the rule over, that's just saying like, I want to use the exact same rule that I did in this other plan or this other hierarchy.
yeah, so I'll go import the segment settings, and then I was using this balance scenario. And in
Mhm.
this case, when I copy that over, it's actually going to build out the smart plan for me. So it's copying everything except for your assignments. And then you can go back and edit those rules. So right now it's kind of running those rules based on that balance scenario rule set. And when it's done, then we'll be able to go back in and change things up if we want to.
Got it. So like if you were doing your minimize disruption, bookings potential, tier A, whatever it may be, you could take that from, you could have that enterprise mid-market SMB, whatever it was, without having to put it in from scratch every time.
Exactly. So here's the case where we've got all these uh, the same rule set that exists here.
Got it. Awesome. I know people are waiting for questions because typically people drop off webinars, but they're done. Everybody's hoping somebody's going to ask a question.
Yeah,
It's like the
I think
credits, like we're waiting for like what happens at the end of the credits and some, what is like a Easter egg or something comes.
yeah, except for we're not the Marvel universe, so
I
I
think
don't
that
know.
I'll add that to our list for next time to have something
The
the rivaling the Marvel full franchise approach to post credits.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing questions, and we are doing another one of these next week. So if any questions do come up, in the meantime, fire them off to Ashley or Ryan. We'll be sure to address them, and we can talk about them on the next call.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for coming. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.